Welcome, Politified, to our second official Walter Block interview. It is my pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Walter Block. If you don't know who Walter Block is, well, what are you doing, first of all? You can find any of his works on the Mises Institute, Mises Wire, and the Mises Bookstore, any of his books. He's a libertarian economist and economic theorist. Welcome, everybody, Walter Block. Walter, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, thanks. Thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure.
It's just as much of a pleasure for us to have you. So we're gonna have a few questions from Chris, and I think we're just gonna get right into it.
Yeah, the first question really is, when we last had you on, we did not have Biden just yet as the president. So what has been your reaction to Biden? Has it been worse or better than you expected? Has he done anything that shocked you?
Well, that's a good question. I guess this is roughly what I expected. We're going toward California or New York State. If he had his druthers, the whole country would be like California or New York State or maybe Illinois or any of those other blue states. Or maybe he's aiming at some of the European countries, the social democratic European countries. My fear, though, is that we'll go the route of Venezuela or North Korea or something like that, because he's sort of more of a figurehead than a leader. I mean, I think not only is he physically debilitated, but mentally debilitated. And who's pulling the strings? It seems to me that, I don't know the specifics, but sort of AOC and Bernie and people like that. And they're, hardcore socialists. And well, I don't know. Do I want to say they're worse than the governors of California or New York? I'm not sure. I don't think they're aiming at Venezuela. I'm sure they're not. I'm sure their goal is California, New York, or some of the European countries, France, Italy, Germany, what have you. The fear is that the whole thing can go to the devil or whatever, go down the tubes, maybe would be a better way to put it. I mean, this thing with COVID, 1.9 trillion, and something like 15% had something to do with COVID, and the rest was just bailing out New York and California and all of those states. And I mean, things weren't so bad until LBJ got going with his Great Society. I mean, I'm a big fan of Charles Murray's book, Losing Ground. And he says that the Great Society pretty much broke up the Black family. And you could read Walter Williams or Thomas Sowell on that. Well, what we now have is sort of like the Great Society on speed or squared or cubed or something like that. I mean, they're really going berserk, tossing all sorts of money at people so that they don't work. I don't know how you can have much of a recovery if people are being paid more to not work than to work. I mean, most people are led by an invisible hand, and if it's in their self-interest not to work and get the government dole, well, that's what they'll do. Well, but that's hardly good for the economy. So I'm not a big fan of Biden, but that's just the economics of it. There's just so much more. This thing, I'm a university professor, and the rule used to be before Trump on campuses that you have to believe women who complain about sexual harassment or whatever, and the burden of proof is on the victim to show that, rather on the perpetrator to show that he's innocent. Whereas it should be the opposite way around, and you're not allowed to confront your accuser. You're not allowed to bring a lawyer. You're not allowed to tape record the proceedings, and they're going back to that. And then on campus we have all sorts of safe spaces and trigger warnings and intersectionality and BLM and feminism and there's a lot of conservative and libertarian professors who are being fired because of this, because they think that this is the new ruling, the way that things are going to go. So I'm not really a happy camper. On the other hand, I'm a ebullient kind of person. I always think the glass is half full. or more, and this will just shift the demand curve to the right for my services, because free enterprise people such as myself will now be even more needed. I mean, under Trump, he wasn't really good on on trade and stuff like that, but he never started any new wars, and he was pretty good on regulation and lowering taxes. Whereas Biden is the very opposite. So the need for libertarian and Austrian theory is even greater now. So I suppose I could look at it positively in that way.
And also, I have another question to add on to that. Did you have any reaction to the many libertarians who were ostensibly like supporting Biden whenever they rejected Trump so hard? Do you have any thought on that?
Well, I don't think any libertarians really. Well, maybe you'll prove me wrong, but there were conservatives who supported Biden because they hated Trump so much. I don't know that there are any libertarians that actually supported Biden. Maybe they supported Biden vis-a-vis Trump, which is not good, because I have the honor of starting two groups along with several colleagues. I started them in 2015 when the race was between Hillary and Trump. One was a thing called, what was it, Libertarians for Trump, and the other was Scholars for Trump. And why Libertarians for Trump? Well, because I thought that Hillary would be worse. And not that I favor Trump. I mean, Trump is no Ron Paul. He's no Rand Paul, but he's better than Hillary. And the idea here was that if you're in a blue state like California, don't vote for Donald, because Donald's going to lose big anyway. So you might as well vote for the Libertarian, because I am a member of the Libertarian Party and I want to promote liberty in that way. And on the other hand, if you're in a red state like my own, Louisiana, well, again, don't vote for Donald, because Donald's going to win a landslide and he doesn't need your vote. But if you're in a purple state, say Pennsylvania or what have you, well, then Donald's going to need your vote. So then vote for Donald. So I thought we'd have our cake and eat it too. We could support the LP and not get Hillary. This didn't really work out too well with the two senatorial races from Virginia, where this guy, I forget his name, he knocked out one at Purdue. He knocked out Purdue. He got 2% of the vote, and Purdue got like 49.9% of the vote. And so the Libertarians were spoilers there. So I favor the LP, and the other group was Scholars for Trump. For Libertarians for Trump, we got about 5,000 signatures. Scholars for Trump, the idea was only redneck, idiot morons would vote for Trump. So you had to have a PhD or a medical degree or something like that to be in Scholars for Trump. We got about 150 signatures. So again, I'm not a Trump supporter. I certainly am not, hate Trump or something like that. It's just that I thought Trump was better. I'm sorry?
The never Trumpers?
The never Trumper. I'm not a never Trumper, but I'm not a real wild-eyed maniac in favor of Trump. I mean, I have my MAGA hat, but if it was Rand Paul versus Trump, there's no question. But if it's Trump versus Biden or Trump versus Hillary, well, then, Trump is the lesser of two evils. And, I get a lot of trouble with a lot of libertarians who say, well, you shouldn't vote. And my answer to that is, well, suppose we were slaves and the master said we could vote for Overseer Goody or Overseer Batty. Overseer Goody will beat us up once a month. Overseer Batty will beat us every day. Well, I'm going to vote for Overseer Goody because he's only going to beat us up once a month. And not that I favor Overseer Goody, it's just vis-a-vis Overseer Batty.
Our next question is a little bit more lighthearted than the first one. The first one is a little serious. And our next question is, do you have any favorite memories of people such as Hoppe, Tom Woods, or any other influential libertarians?
Yeah, well, Chris is a mucho serioso. We got to watch out for him. Well, Hans and Tom are buddies of mine. One of my great fun is I once attended his seminar in Bodrum, Turkey, on the west coast of Turkey, and Hans put on a magnificent show. I'm a big fan of Hans in many ways. I think he is magnificent in his argument from argument or argumentation ethics. which I think is the best, how shall I say it, justification of the non-aggression principle, which is the foundation of libertarianism. So I'm a big fan of his. I'm a big fan of Tom Woods. I mean, Tom Woods, I think, is pretty much the best public speaker in the libertarian movement. He is just magnificent. And his many books, what do you call it? The 1921, what do you call it? Depression, a great book. One of his books I use in my my course on economics and religion. The one on, I forget the title, but do Catholics have
Church
to be
and Market?
That's it, right? Church and Market. I'm calling it the commie. The Christians have to be commies. That was my recollection of the title, but I think you're more accurate there. So I'm a big fan of Tom and Hans, but I don't like to brag, but I'll brag a little. I'm one of the few people alive today who can say that he actually shook the hand of Ludwig von Mises. And I never washed my hands since. It's a little dirty, but if you shake my hand, you'll channel Mises. And also, I was sort of buddies with Hayek. I played chess with him, and I guess most of all, I was a friend of Murray Rothbard for, I don't know, 30 years or so. So those are three of my heroes. And I don't know, I was sort of also a buddy of Robert Nozick. Met him at Murray's living room. And the whole living room crowd of Murray's that I was part of. And now I'm associated with the Mises Institute, which has got a whole bunch of eminent Austro-libertarians. So I've been very lucky in my choice of friends and colleagues and co-authors. I'm co-authored with a lot of these people. I think I'm the only co-author of Murray Rothbard. Most of the stuff he ever did was, oh, and I have to brag further about Murray. Murray Rothbard never won the medal, the Rothbard Medal of Freedom. I did. Ha ha.
I believe, Ben, you're actually mentioning Robert Nozick. Ben, I believe you had a question on him, right?
Yeah, I did. I actually didn't know that you were friends with Robert Nozick, but I was wondering what your thoughts on Anarchy, State, and Utopia. I actually have the book right here. I think it's a very interesting book.
Well, it's a magnificent book. I mean, look, he's not an anarchist. I'm an anarchist, so we diverge. But by gum and by golly, that is, I think he was made a full professor at Harvard at age 28, or 27 or 29, which is very, very young to be made a full professor anywhere. And you know, Harvard is one of the most prestigious schools on the planet. He is just a riveting personality, brilliant, brilliant man. My favorite quote from his short quote, it goes something like, what is it? Chris, you'll help me with the exact quote. We favor capitalist acts between consenting adults. That's it. Yeah. Capitalist acts between consenting adults. See, the lefties are always saying we favor anything between consenting adults. And what Robert Nozick is saying, well, how about capitalist acts between consenting adults, buying, selling, renting, lending, whatever? Why don't we favor that too? It's sort of a way of really digging it in to the left. I mean, the book is just magnificent, except he is not an anarchist, and I think the anarchist is the only correct libertarian position. Now, look, the way I see libertarianism, the anarchists make up maybe 1 or 2% of all people calling themselves libertarian, whereas the other three groups, that would be the Ayn Rand limited government people, the Ron Paul constitutionalists, and then the classical liberals of, say, Hayek and Friedman. As we go down the list, the government gets to do more and more. Those are like 30 and 30% of libertarianism, and anarcho-capitalists are very few. But I think it's the correct position. And you asked me about Robert Nozick, and what he says is that, what is it that the, how does he put it? The leading, I'm sorry?
Do you mean the night watchman state?
Yeah. What he says is that the leading defense agency is going to have to ensure that the other defense agencies are kosher, you know, that they don't base their decisions on tea leaves or flipping a coin. And therefore, the main defense agency has a right to compel them not to do that. And therefore, if it's going to compel them, it has to give them some services to be fair. And that's how, what he says is that through a pure market process, if ever we had an anarcho-capitalist society, it would coalesce into a government. And I think that's just totally wrong. I mean, you know, why should the leading defense agency have any better ways of finding criminality than the smaller ones? And maybe they'll all be equal. And if it were true, if this coalescing thing, centralization thing were true, why do we have around 250 countries right now? Why don't we have 2 or 3? Oceania, you know, that triumph. I mean, the number of countries has been remarkably stable for the last 200, 300, 400 years. So if there were any of this centralizing tendency that Robert Nozick sees for defense agencies, if we can extrapolate it to countries, we would see fewer and fewer countries until we'd have one world government. Because that's what he really wants in the United States, one US government. I mean, you could have 50 states, but they're a subsidiary to the central government. So I think Nozick is out to lunch on that. Another problem that I have with Nozick is he once attacked Austrian economics. This was not in his book, but it was in a journal article. And what he said is, look, he wasn't an Austrian, he wasn't even an economist, but boy, oh boy, was he a brilliant economist, even though he wasn't a credentialed economist. And what he said was, look, you Austrians, you believe in 2 things, and the 2 things are incompatible. On the one hand, you believe in the supply curve. Well, yeah, we believe in the supply curve, supply of shoes, supply of wheat, supply of copper, whatever. And the whole definition of a supply curve has got homogeneous elements in it. Because if the copper is different, there are 2 different kinds of copper, then you have 2 supply curves. If you have one supply curve, it's got to be the same quality of steel, unless maybe the quality of steel didn't matter and you could put them all together. I mean, we do have a supply curve of cars, and cars are not homogeneous, they are heterogeneous, but for certain purposes, you can count them as homogeneous. The point is that if you put them in a supply curve, and we believe in supply curves, well, they have to be homogeneous in some way. On the other hand, you're against indifference. And that's true. We are also against indifference because we think that because you can't demonstrate indifference. Chris, you have a nice checked shirt. You bought that shirt for $20. This shows to me as an economist that you valued that shirt at more than $20 when you bought it. So ex ante, you made a profit off of it. And I sold you that shirt. I'm the shirt salesman, and I have 300 of them, and I value them at $1 each. So I made a $19 profit off of you. We exploited each other. Well, actually, we profited off of each other, of course. The Marxists would say it's mutual exploitation. Boy, aren't they silly. So, but how do you ever demonstrate indifference? Not through human action. Mises would say. I mean, his whole book was predicated on human action. So you can't have indifference. On the other hand, the word indifference is a perfectly good word in the English language. I think one of you was drinking something, maybe a Coca-Cola or something. There you go, a can of something. Well, when you bought that can, there were probably 50 of them on the shelf in the store. And I'm happy to say that before you engaged in action, you were indifferent. You didn't care which can, they were all homogeneous, you just grabbed one. But you're a lazy so-and-so, so you grab the one that was most convenient because you don't want to hassle and go around and get one in the back, right? Or if they're piled up, you're not going to take one from the bottom and topple them all over. So you took one from the top in the front because you're lazy. So the point is, my point in criticizing Nozick is, yes, there is indifference before human action, but when human action occurs, there's no more indifference. So sure, you can have a supply curve and you can attack indifference. We attack indifference curves because, we think that indifference can't reveal human action or preference. So we Austrians are big into preference. and human action, and that's incompatible with indifference. So that's my way of reconciling. And I wrote an article criticizing Robert Nozick. Now it's interesting that Hans attacked me, and he and I got it on indifference curves. We had a back and forth a little bit, but very friendly. I mean, we're good buddies. And what Hans said was roughly, yes, I applaud Walter's attempt to undermine Nozick's attack on Austrianism, but he didn't do a real good job. We can do a better job. And then he went on to do a better job in his view. And Bill Barnett and I wrote a reply to Hans. So, but this shows that we're not a cult. I mean, if you're in the Ayn Rand cult, you don't find two lieutenants of Randianism, and I don't know if I'm applauding myself too much to say I'm a lieutenant in the Austrian movement. I think that's okay, and certainly Hans is. So we disagreed. So big deal. You know, I once co-authored an article with David Gordon, and I forget what it was, but we disagreed on something, and we were co-authors. So we had a little footnote saying, well, you know, David says this, Walter says that, you know, so we're allowed to disagree. Whereas a lot of people like James Buchanan think that Austrianism is a cult. And my PhD advisor, mentor, Gary Becker, once called Austrianism a cult. We're not a cult. We can disagree with each other.
Yeah, I certainly think that Nozick's arguments are much better than Randian arguments for a monarchist state. But yeah, I've definitely seen a couple different responses to it, like Murray Rothbard, and even David Friedman did a speech on it. And so speaking of David Friedman, what are your thoughts on non-Austrian utilitarian anarcho-capitalists like David Friedman?
Well, you know, David and his father are great libertarians. You know, I sometimes people ask me, how do you promote libertarianism? What's the best way to promote libertarianism? And my answer is, well, let's look at the three people who've had more success in promoting libertarianism than any other three people. And the three people would obviously be Ayn Rand for my generation, Ron Paul for your generation, and Milton Friedman in third place. Now, I don't think Milton Friedman was a better libertarian or a better economist than Murray Rothbard or Ludwig von Mises. It's just that he had a bigger megaphone, so he converted more people. But what I get from them, they were very different people. I mean, Ron Paul is a sweetie pie. I mean, he just sort of exudes goodness. It sort of comes off of him like an aura. And if you called Ayn Rand a sweetie pie, she'd smack you in the face. You know, she was not a sweetie pie. I mean, she was delightful. And by the way, I'm very grateful to her for converting me to libertarianism. I was a pinko socialist along with my high school buddy, Bernie Sanders. But getting back to the question, I'm a professor. I'm never supposed to answer a question directly. I have to go off here and there. So I was asked about David Friedman, and now I'm bringing in Milton Friedman, and they are both neoclassical economists, right-wing neoclassical economists. Of course, you know, Milton Friedman once said, we're all Keynesians now. That's something that you're not going to hear from anyone at the Mises Institute. I'll tell you that. David Friedman is an anarchist. Murray Rothbard once wrote an essay on attacking David, and he said he'd rather be involved with a limited government person who hates the state because the state went above where they think the state should be, than David Friedman, who favors no state whatsoever but doesn't hate the state. David Friedman has no visceral hatred for the state. He just sort of thinks, well, you know, the state's inefficient and the market would be more efficient, but if it was the other way around, he'd favor statism. Whereas people, so David Friedman is I think a good economist, but he's a what do you call it? A neoclassical. Like take antitrust. David Friedman and Milton Friedman all agree that there is such a thing as market failure. Monopoly, externalities, public goods, this, that, and the other. They just think that the government failure is even worse. Whereas the Austrians say that there ain't no such thing as market failure. So I applaud David Friedman. I think he's a very articulate guy, very well spoken, a good libertarian, maybe not for the right reasons. He's more of a utilitarian than he is a deontologist. I once asked Milton Friedman, from whence does your passion for justice spring? And he said, I hate that expression. I have no passion for justice. Justice is monstrous. We shouldn't think about justice because people start fighting because they disagree on justice. You're not going to hear Murray Rothbard say anything like that. I mean, Murray Rothbard, his middle name was Justice. Well, it was Newton, but I'm renaming him. Justice was really his middle name. I'm sure he wouldn't object to me saying something like that. I once. David Friedman also has an attack on the non-aggression principle. In his chapter 43 of his book, Machinery of Freedom, he starts in with this analysis that, what is it? If I shine a flashlight into your house, or rather, I just light up a cigarette in my house, and there's a light that you can see because I drew the curtains. Well, that's not a rights violation. But how about if I get a bigger and bigger flashlight and I shine it on your house, and eventually the flashlight is so powerful that it sets a fire? And therefore, the non-aggression principle is wrong. And I don't know how he gets that, but in any case, I wrote a nice article. I think it was in the Journal of Libertarian Studies, and I sent it to him. And I said, David, I'm attacking you. How about writing a reply? And we'll get it on, not physically, but let's debate about this stuff. And he declined to do that. So I guess he's too busy with other things that he thinks is more important. So I give David Friedman an A-, anarcho-capitalist, a very free market economist, a libertarian, even though a utilitarian, like Hayek, and like Mises. Not a deontological one like Murray Rothbard, but A- is pretty good mark.
Yeah, what he told me is that he's sort of a deontologist, but he doesn't know how to justify his ethics. So he kind of goes to utilitarianism.
Well, he's one of the most bitter critics of Hans Hoppe's argument from argument. And that, I mean, if somebody says, well, yes, I favor the non-aggression principle, I favor deontology, but I don't know how to justify it, I'd say, go read Hans.
Yeah.
Well, he read Hans and he rejected it totally. And he said it was, screwy, or I'm putting words in his mouth.
I think it was like in the symposium, right? The Liberty Symposium back in '86 when Hoppe wrote about it. His argument, I forget his argument, but I remember he responded very negatively to it.
Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of Hans on that.
Our next question is actually in relation to the Mises Institute, and we were wondering what role you think the Mises Institute has played in the advancement of libertarian principles in your generation of libertarians, and of course in this current generation of libertarianism.
Well, there are other. Lou doesn't like to call it a think tank, but I don't know what else to call the Mises Institute and the Reason Foundation and Cato Institute and CEI and all the 50 state think tanks, other than a think tank, or the Fraser Institute. I used to work for it in California. All I could say is that if you put those in and call that an industry, whatever the industry is, think tanks, or I don't know, educational institutes or something like that, the Mises Institute gets an A+, and nobody else gets even a, well, others people might get a B+, but nobody gets an A-. There's a big gap between the Mises Institute, in my view, and every other group. The Mises Institute is the gold standard of institutes, free market institutes, call it that, instead of think tanks. They are utterly magnificent. They have a bunch of conferences, like the conference, the Austrian Economic Research Center. There's going to be the Mises University. There'll be the Libertarian Scholars Conference that Joe Salerno puts on in New York City once a year. They are a treasure trove of books and articles that they make available for free to people. But that's just quantity. Let's talk quality. I mean, these other groups, they compromise in all sorts of things. I mean, the Reason people and the Cato people, but, yes, we're for free trade, but, we just can't have a unilateral declaration of free trade with everybody. That would be too radical. I'm sort of not a big fan of the Reason Foundation, because this guy, Gillespie, when I got into it with the New York Times over voluntary slavery, the New York Times was interviewing about slavery, and obviously I oppose real slavery, but I concocted this thing of voluntary slavery, and they accused me of supporting actual slavery. Can you imagine that? And Nick Gillespie reported this. And then one time I had a debate with him, and he wanted to shake my hand. And I said, I really can't shake your hand because, you said that I favored slavery. And he said, oh, I apologize. I said, yeah, but, you're just doing it now in front of me and 2 or 3 other people. You publicly did this. How about doing it publicly? And he didn't promise that he would do that, so I couldn't shake his hand. Well, and then Ron Paul is a litmus test. If you like Ron Paul, you can't be all bad. I don't care if you're an axe murderer. Well, I'm not serious. But if you like Ron Paul, you're pretty good. And if you don't like Ron Paul, it's a litmus test. You could probably come up with exceptions, but by gum and by golly, Ron Paul he's not a doctor. He's a saint. Look, I changed Murray Newton Rothbard's middle name. I'm changing Ron Paul's title. Ron is a saint. And what's the view of the reason people on Ron Paul? Negative. Come on. I mean, that's crazy. And the Cato people.
Yeah.
Well, you don't have to ask what the view of the Mises people is on Ron Paul. It's very, very positive. So these are reasons why I would favor the Mises Institute vis-a-vis any of these other groups. Now, there are state groups. We have one in Louisiana. The Pelican Institute, and it's a fine group, and they don't really get involved in these internecine warfare things. So I might give them an A- or something, but they're much smaller and mainly focused on Louisiana or Arkansas interests, things like that.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Reason also wrote a couple articles about Murray Rothbard and Hoppe being alt-right. But either way, moving on to the next one, which kind of relates to this, what are your thoughts kind of on the division that a lot of left libertarians often make on with the Mises Institute, calling them racist or fascist, or even doing the same to Hoppe and Rothbard, all the BS essentially?
Well, I just wanted to mention one more thing that I thought about on the previous question, and then I'll get to that. And that is, what about the Libertarian Party? Well, I've been in the Libertarian Party since before it started nationally. I ran for office in 1969 for the New York State Assembly. My motto was disassemble the assembly, get rid of the assembly. What's the Libertarian Party view on Ron Paul? Well, they start making gratuitous attacks on Ron Paul. That's not good. So, okay, now let's get, the Mises Institute is supposedly anti-Semitic and anti-women and anti-Black and anti-this and anti-whatever. They're not exactly politically correct, and I'm not exactly politically correct either. But this whole thing, take the anti-Semitism thing. Who is the Mises Institute named after? Mises. Guess what religion Mises was? Jewish. If the Mises Institute, look, I'm changing everyone's name, so I'm going to now change the Mises Institute, and I'm going to call it the Mises Rothbard Institute. Well, what religion was Murray? Jewish. I'm Jewish. I'm associated with the Mises Institute. David Gordon is Jewish. There must be 4 or 5 other people in the top 15. Maybe 1/3 of all the people involved in the Mises Institute are Jews. Now, look. Now they're supposed to be that's crazy anti-Semitism. Anti-women? That's nonsense. There are many women who write for the Mises Institute, and it's true there are very few blacks do. But people like Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams and Jason Riley, namely the black conservatives, black libertarians. Well, Sowell and Williams weren't really good on war and foreign policy, but boy, oh boy, were they good on racism and sexism and discrimination and stuff like that. The Mises people would support them. The Mises Institute does support them. Well, if the Mises Institute is racist and hates all black people, well, what about Sowell and Walter Williams and all these other people? Lipton Matthews, a new young black man, is writing for them regularly. That's not the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan doesn't allow blacks in there. The Mises Institute welcomes black people. It welcomes purple people. When I was a kid, there was what was it, a rock and roll song about the flying purple people eater or something like that. If there were people from Mars who favored the free enterprise system, the Mises Institute would support them. So I think that these criticisms are just nonsense on a stick.
Speaking of Lipton Matthews, I actually know him. He's a good friend of mine. He's a great guy. But I guess
who's that? I didn't hear you.
Continuing on, Lipton Matthews, the guy
yes.
who's running for the Mises Institute. Yeah.
Yes.
But going on the points of divergence from the Mises Institute, what are your thoughts on the full versus fractional reserve banking and like pro-fractional reservers like Selgin or Michael J. Hoffman? I don't know if you know of his new book. Michael J. Hoffman, who wrote Monetary Kinetic or something like that.
Yeah, or Larry White would be another person.
Yeah.
Who favors, well, I am not a big fan of fractional reserve banking. I think fractional reserve banking is fraudulent, even if everybody knows, what's going on there. Even if it's, look, suppose Chris, I'm now going to sell you a square circle for $20. Want to buy one? Well, I don't care if we agree to buy a square circle or sell a square circle. You can't sell a square circle. And I think that fractional reserve banking has got some of the symbolic logic elements of a square circle. It's a contradiction. Okay, so here's the situation. I deposit $100 in the Chris Bank. And what do you do, Chris? Well, you have, say, a fractional reserve of 10%. Okay, so what you do is you give me a checking deposit or a credit card or something for $100, right? And then what you do is you go to Ben and and you lend him $90, and you give him a checking deposit also for $90. And now guess what? It used to be $100, and now there's $190. And now you lend $80 or $81 because we're keeping it 10%, and you lend it to Liam, and now there's 100 plus 90 plus 80, $270. And if we carry this all the way through with a 10% fraction, it would be $1,000 out of the 100, namely 1/110, or you go tenfold. Well, you just created money out of the thin air. I don't care if everyone agreed to it. This is highly problematic. You're in effect stealing money from other people. So I think that this is incompatible with libertarianism. And I think that if we had a libertarian government, or if we had anarcho-capitalists of the Rothbardian variety, it would be prohibited. Just like fraud is prohibited. This is fraudulent. You're not supposed to be creating money out of thin air. And that's what the fractional reserve banking does. So I oppose it. And that would be just on deontological grounds. On economic grounds, it creates the business cycle. It lowers the rate of interest. It creates inflation, or it is inflation. Rather, I misspoke. It is inflationary, and it creates the business cycle. It creates a boom, and then you got to have a bust when you have a boom. So I oppose fractional reserve banking. I think Larry White and George Selgin are splendid economists and very, very good libertarians, but we disagree on this one issue.
All right, I have another question, or actually two questions, but I'll start with the first one. What are some of your disagreements with Rothbard, and what were some of his reactions to your disagreements?
Murray is a sweetie pie. A lot of people say that Murray broke from them. Murray didn't break from anyone. They broke from Murray. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but I disagree with Murray on 4 or 5 things, and Murray never came within a million miles of breaking with me. He was very tolerant of me. He would disagree with me a little bit, and we would argue about it. But he did. Murray was much more argumentative in writing than in person. When you were in person with him, it was a sort of a party thing, and his main thing was laughing and having fun. So we never really got into it much, but a little bit, and Murray would do a little bit. For example, voluntary slavery. I think that voluntary slavery is justified. The example I sometimes use, God forbid my son has a horrible disease, and it'll cost 25 million to cure him, and I don't have anything like 25 million. And Ben, you've long wanted me to be a slave of yours. I come to your plantation, I pick cotton, I give you economics lessons, and if you don't like the cut of my jib, you can whip me or kill me. So we make a deal. Give me 25 million, and I turn the 25 million over to my son's doctors, and I save his life. And now I come to your plantation, and we both gain from ex ante from all voluntary trades. I gain because I value his life more than my freedom. Ben, you gain because you value my servitude more than the 20 million. You're very, very rich. You're like Bill Gates. So this is justified. Murray disagreed. And I've written many an article attacking Murray. Look, my own students sometimes attack me, and I try to emulate Murray in every way I can. So when my students disagree with me, I try to help them. I try to argue them out of their wrong position. But in many cases, I try to get their articles published, even though it's an attack on me. Murray's argument mainly was the will. You can't alienate the will. And my argument was, I don't care about the will. I'm talking about when Ben is now beating me. And I see Chris, the cop. I say, hey, Chris, cop, Ben is beating me. Tell him to stop. And Chris says, well, what's going on? And Ben shows a bill of sale for my servitude. And Chris says, well, it looked as if it was assault and battery, but, you agreed to it. So shut up. So I disagree with Murray on that. There are other things I disagreed with him on. Immigration was another one I disagreed with him. Well, actually, Murray changed his views on that. Initially, Murray had this view of open borders. That's my view, open borders. And then later, under the influence of Hans, he changed his mind. I believe in open borders because my argument is, look, suppose somebody comes in a helicopter from Mars or from Africa or God knows where, and he lands in the middle of the Rocky Mountains in Wyoming. And by the way, the mountaintop in Wyoming has never been touched by human feet or human hands. It's virgin territory. And this guy from Mars or Africa or Asia or God knows where he's from, Mexico for all I know, he starts planting a crop and, doing this and that. And now along somebody comes from ICE, the people in charge of the border. And they say, show me your papers. And says, papers? I don't have any papers. Well, then they're going to kick him out. Well, what libertarian law did he violate? He's just homesteading virgin territory. And you're going to kick him out? Now, Hans starts saying, well, the U.S. government really owns that stuff. And I'm saying, Hans, come on, you're an anarcho-capitalist. What's this government crap? And in any case, this is virgin territory. He's and Hans has been brilliant, magnificent on Lockean and Rothbardian homesteading theory. So, what law did he violate? Now, I also have this other view that utilitarianism. Do we really want 1 trillion Martians to come to the country? No, we really don't want them, even if they're nice guys, because they'll vote the Martian way or whatever way the Martians vote. So how are we going to keep them out? Compatible with libertarian theory. Well, there's one way we could, namely go and homestead every square inch of the United States. Now, it's true there's some submarginal land out there, like that stuff in the middle of Wyoming in the Rockies. It's submarginal. Nobody wants it. It's not really usable yet with our present technology. But if you're worried about people coming in, go homestead it. And then they can't come in. Then they're trespassing. But you have to homestead every square inch, and not only of land, but also water. Homestead the Mississippi River, homestead Lake Pontchartrain, homestead Lake Superior. homestead the Finger Lakes in New York State. And then when every square inch is homesteaded, then and only then can we keep everyone out unless they're invited in. So those would be two areas where I disagree with Murray. Another one is on Israel. Murray was not a big fan of Israel. I'm a big fan of Israel. The issue is, well, did the Israelis steal Palestinian lands? And Murray goes back, I don't know, to 1870 or so. And he finds that, well, the Palestinians were there then, and the Jews took it over. And my co-authors and I go back 2,000 years, and we say there weren't any Palestinians there. Like South Africa, you see what happened, South Africa was pretty empty, and the first people that homesteaded South Africa were white. And then they had a good economy, and then the black people came in to work for the whites. And the Israelis. There weren't that many Palestinians around, but the Jews had a good economy and they were prosperous, and Palestinians came in and worked for them. So that would be a third area where I disagree. A fourth area, and here I disagree with not only Murray, but also with Ron. But again, you know, I'm friends with Ron. I was friends for many years with Murray. You know, just because you disagree doesn't mean you can't be friends. The fourth area is abortion. And what's going on in abortion? Well, you know, Ron Paul is pro-life. Murray Rothbard is pro-choice. You can't get too further apart from that. They're 180 degrees apart on that. And I have actually two books coming out on this issue where I think I am correct and both of them are wrong. And my view on this is evictionism. You see, the pro-life people say you can't evict. Evict means take the fetus out of the woman's stomach, and you can't kill. Well, you can evict after 9 months, but you know you can't. Well, that's when the baby normally leaves. So the pro-life people say you can't evict and you can't kill. The pro-choice people say you can evict whenever you want, and you can also kill. Because the fetus is just a blob or, you know, something like that. Well, my view is when does life start? Life starts with the fertilized egg. Because the sperm alone and the egg alone will not eventuate into a person. But if you put the sperm and the egg together, or the sperm goes into the egg and now it's a fertilized egg, you just sit there for 9 months and all of a sudden there's going to be a person. Well, I think the person starts right then and there. You know, in the Jewish tradition, you know when human life begins? When the baby graduates medical school? That's supposed to be a joke, not very funny, but actually it's when the heart beats. And some people say that's when human life starts. So I don't believe in that. I mean, people's heart stops every once in a while. They get a heart attack and their heart isn't beating. So they're not human? No, they're human. You don't need a heartbeat. You're human when you have the DNA of human beings, and fertilized egg has got all the DNA it needs. So it's a human being. So now, how do we get into evictionism? Means that you have a right to evict, but not to kill. Well, of course not to kill, because it's a human being. You're not allowed to kill innocent human beings. But it's a trespasser. The baby is a trespasser. I mean, take the case of rape. It's easy to see trespass there. Woman is walking down the street, she gets grabbed, she gets impregnated, and now there's this person growing inside of her. Well, if that's not a trespasser, I don't know what a trespasser is. Well, what do you have a right to do if Liam comes into my house and he sits there? Well, he's innocent. I don't have a right to shoot him, but I have a right to evict him. Well, there's this person growing inside the woman, and she owns her body. She homesteaded it long before the baby. The baby is 3 months old and she's 25 years old. She beat him to her body. She owns that body. She has a right to say who stays inside her body and who doesn't. Now, you might say, well, what about ordinary intercourse? Because there aren't that many babies who eventuate from rape. Well, even in ordinary intercourse, you know, the idea is that the mother invited the baby in. And therefore, you know, if I invite you to my house, I have to keep you there for 9 months. That's a problem. Also, another problem is an invitation requires two people, an inviter and an invitee. Well, at the time of sexual intercourse, there was no invitee. because the baby doesn't come around until the fertilized egg appears, and intercourse occurs, and then it takes a half hour, an hour, or 5 hours, I'm not sure, for the sperm to wiggle its way up toward the egg. Only then is there an invitee, long after intercourse. So intercourse cannot be interpreted as an invitation. And even if it were, that doesn't mean you stay there for 9 months. I invite you to my house for dinner, and I start hinting at around 10 o'clock, you should leave. You can't say, well, I'm staying here 9 months. So those would be 4 or 5 areas where I disagree with Murray.
So on evictionism, if I remember correctly, you said something about partial ownership, as in the parent is a guardian of the fetus or the baby. Is that correct? Or am I thinking of someone else?
Yeah, well, this isn't so much on evictionism. This is more the proper relationship of children and parents. And what's going on there? I think parents can't own their children. Children should be owners, but they can own the right to be their guardians, right? So I think the proper relationship between a parent and a child is the parent is the guardian, and in land, once you own the land, you own the land. You can be an absentee landowner. You don't have to keep mixing your labor with the land forever, right? Look, right now I have a car. It's parked downstairs. I'm not mixing my labor with it, but if you come and take my car, you're stealing my car. But with children, you have to keep homesteading them. Namely, you have to keep feeding them, right? So children, you would have an obligation to feed them if you wanted to stay as their guardian. Now, this brings up the question, well, suppose parents come home from the hospital with a newborn baby, and they leave the baby in the crib, and they never feed the baby, and the baby dies. Did they commit a crime? Well, a basic element of libertarian theory is there are no positive obligations. So you might think, well, they have no obligation to feed the baby, let the baby die. But I disagree with that. I think they do have an obligation to bring, they don't have to feed the baby, but if they don't want to feed the baby, they have to bring the baby to a church or a synagogue or an orphanage or I don't know what, a hospital, something like that, where there'll be other people taking care of the baby. Is it possible to have a what do you call it, a screen? I want to draw something for you good people.
Yeah, I think Liam, you have to allow him to do that, right? You're muted, by the way.
Yeah, you have to give me permission to do that.
I will grant him permission right now. Here, let's see. Allow. I believe you should be able to now. I will also. You can
I don't
it.
see.
You have to share your screen. You share your screen, and it
How
lets
do
you.
I? Let me see if I can share my screen. There it goes. Okay, I got share screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing. So you have to allow me. Right now, you're not allowing me to do it.
Oh, there you go.
You guys have to do something. Have you done it?
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay. Now, here's the question. Here is a bagel or a donut. And here's area A, and here's area B, and here's area C. Do I have a right to homestead land in this proportion? Just the bagel, leaving open the hole in the middle or 1 square mile in the middle? And the answer forthcoming from me is no. I don't have a right to homestead in that way. Why not? Because then I'll be controlling, and this is before there were tunnels and there were no bridges and there were no helicopters, nothing, right? You with me?
Yeah.
I don't have a right to homestead in the format of the bagel, because then I would be controlling area A without ever having homesteaded it. And, just as, what is it? Nature abhors a vacuum. Libertarianism abhors unowned land. Our ultimate goal is every square inch should be owned by somebody. We don't want to have the tragedy of the commons. We don't want to have, God forbid, government ownership of land. We got to privatize it. My motto is, If it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. Since everything either moves or doesn't move, you privatize everything. So we got to privatize A. But this guy, this rascal B, won't let people in. So he is precluding or forestalling, right? He is guilty of a crime by doing that. He's got to allow people to have a little path through here, and maybe through here also, and wherever anyone wants to get. He's got to allow, if he wants, he should homestead A, and then there'll be no problem. And if he doesn't homestead A, he's got to allow other people in, and they got to get in and out. They just can't get in, and he traps them in there, and he can't preclude them from getting out. So he is precluding or forestalling them. Now let's get back to that baby in the crib. What are those parents doing? They are precluding other people from homesteading that kid. Other people want to go and take care of that kid. Other people want to be the guardian of that kid. Other people want to adopt that kid. So when I tell those parents, you're committing murder by keeping that kid I think I'm finished with
Oh yeah.
this. So now I see you guys again. What those parents are guilty of doing is something akin to what the bagel guy is doing or the donut guy is doing, namely precluding other people from something that they no longer own. Because now look, you can't own the baby, but you can own the guardianship rights to the baby. And the only way to own the guardianship rights to the baby is to feed the baby. And if you stop feeding the baby, you're no longer the guardian. Guardian is an honorific. You have to keep earning it, not like land where you can be the absentee guardian or the car or something like that. So that would be my analysis of that objection to libertarianism. People would say, well, you don't favor, you don't adhere to positive obligations, and now we'll have a starving baby. That would be an embarrassment. So I had to concoct a bagel to answer that question when I was doing my work on abortion. And by the way, I'm coming out with 2 different books on abortion. One, all previous, I must have written maybe 15 articles attacking everybody who disagreed with me. And a lot of people disagree with me, including Murray. And I attacked Murray on this, and several other people, maybe 15 other people. So each book has got maybe 15 criticisms of me against people who disagreed with me, because I think this is the correct libertarian view, and pro-life and pro-choice are just wrong.
So what my thoughts on the whole thing with the donut and relationship to evictionism, and then with the children, like you said, if you're preventing a child, let's say a 5-year-old child, from getting food and not giving them shelter, and they die, as a result, you're precluding them from someone else's ownership, and in the sense of them stepping in and being a moral actor and a guardian for them. So what I was wondering is what the difference with evictionism would be, because the way I would see it is that if the child has a positive obligation for food and for shelter, then as a fetus, the only way for them to get food and shelter would be in the womb, unless you have, some sort of external womb, some sort of artificial womb, or, some sort of womb transferal, which, obviously that's outside of our realm of possibility right now. But if you did have that, I would say that you definitely can utilize that, and there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But what would the difference in that case be?
Are you daring to disagree with me? I hate you. You're evil. You're a monster. I refuse to speak to you. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. If I were a Randian, I would do that.
I know a lot of Randians, and
oh yeah, we run across a couple Randians. We know the struggle.
They're weird people. No, I'm just being silly when I say I hate you for disagreeing with me. I encourage disagreement. That's the way we get to the truth. I'm a big fan of John Stuart Mill, who said if you only know your own side of the issue, you don't even know your own side, because your own side is defined in tandem with the other side. And if you're totally ignorant of what the other guy is saying, you don't really even know what your own view is. But I don't see the objection, Ben, to evictionism. What I'm saying is that the baby is a trespasser, That is, the unwanted baby is a trespasser. Take the case of rape. It's easy to see that that baby is an innocent trespasser, but a trespasser. And we libertarians, we think that you have a right to remove trespassers from your property. And this isn't just property like your house or your car or your boat. This is your body. And there's somebody growing inside of you. Well, if you can't evict that person, the whole idea of private property rights goes out the window. So I'm not sure where you and I diverge on evictionism, Ben.
Yeah, I'm sort of saying, like, from what I understand, your position is after they're born, then you can have a positive obligation to feed them and shelter them.
No. You never have any positive obligations. We libertarians don't believe in positive obligations, only negative obligation. You have an obligation not to murder. You have an obligation not to steal. You have an obligation not to rape. You have an obligation not to commit fraud. Not to commit a fractional reserve banking. There are a lot of negative obligation, but you don't have one single solitary positive obligation. You don't have any obligation to feed the poor or to be nice or anything like that. You can be a nasty person and be a libertarian. Just keep your mitts to yourself.
Okay, so what if I worded it as you have a negative obligation to not preclude the fetus from others, or the child from others?
Well, not the fetus. We're talking about the baby in the crib now.
Yeah.
Right. And you had that. It was a very well said. You said it beautifully. You have a negative obligation not to preclude. Okay. So yes, you have a negative obligation not to preclude. You have your baby in the crib in the bedroom, and you're not feeding him. You and your wife are not feeding him. And I want that baby. I want to adopt that baby. Well, if you don't notify me by bringing the baby to an orphanage or whatever hospital, well, then you're a murderer. You have violated the negative obligation of not precluding. You've precluded. You're a rotten kid. You shouldn't preclude.
Yeah, so I was wondering how that doesn't really apply in the case of a fetus. Because, I mean, in the case of an evictionism, if you're evicting them, then you're depriving them of the food and shelter of the womb. So that's what I'm viewing it as.
I see. I didn't get it before. Thanks for clarifying. Look, right now, with present technology, in the first 2 trimesters, the first 6 months, if you remove the baby from the womb, I assume the baby dies.
Right.
In the 3rd trimester, the 7th, 8th, and 9th month, you can remove the baby. And then, Ron Paul talks about these cases where a baby gets born and they stick the baby in a bucket and they let the baby die. It's just horrible. That's not even, that's infanticide. That's not abortion. That's infanticide, because once the baby is out of the womb, the baby is an infant, even if he's in the 8th month. So let's take a baby in the 3rd month. If it would be possible to remove the baby and safely, well, then you have to remove the baby safely so that somebody else can adopt the baby. But I'm assuming, I might be wrong, but I think the medical technology at present is such that in the first 6 months, you remove the baby dies. So there's no question of precluding or anyone adopting. The precluding only comes with infants when you take them home from the hospital and you put them in the crib. Mm-hmm. And then you don't feed them, which is, pretty grotesque.
So would you say it's more so about like the time frame, like because there's no sort of immediate adoption available, that's the reason evictionism is acceptable, as opposed to, like starving the baby in the crib?
Well, the whole issue doesn't arise with the baby in the first 6 months. Now, take the baby in the 8th month. Now the baby, you evict the baby in the 8th month. Well, what happens with that baby? You have to bring that baby to right away or you have to notify an orphanage, and the orphanage people have to be standing right outside the operating room where the baby comes out, and then they whisk the baby into whatever, some sort of I don't know, oxygen tent or whatever to keep the baby going, and then the new parents take over the baby. So I'm still not sure why you're rejecting the one true argument here.
So unfortunately, we don't have much time.
Okay.
To continue with this.
Yeah.
I don't want to continue this forward because I'm afraid this will actually turn into a debate with the way Ben is and how opinionated he is.
But I think it is nice to show that we can disagree. Like,
So
I think
just
we
wanna-
all.
Yeah, I've been like working on this sort of thing, and I just wanted to hear like your direct
Dean
responses to
disagrees
some
with
of
you
the
on-
questions I had.
what?
So I definitely
Look,
appreciate hearing those
Ben,
answers.
I've written, just Google me and evictionism or Google me and abortion, and you'll get 15 articles that are out there. So look, by the way, I promised you guys a half hour, but I was late, so I gave you a whole hour. But let's do this in a month or two. And in the meantime, Ben, do some homework, read some of the stuff, and maybe you'll come up with other objections, or maybe you'll agree with me. But whatever it is, we'll have fun.
Yeah,
Let me, since we're at the end, let me just put in a commercial announcement. I'm a professor at Loyola University. I'm looking for students like you guys who are very bright and interested in these issues. And it's not just me. We have 3 out of 3 of the economics department are all Austro-libertarians. Plus, we have a few other Austrians and libertarians, and we have a few at next door Tulane. So if you're thinking of going to college, think of coming to Loyola University as well.
Well,
Perfect.
thank you, Walter, for coming on.
Thank you so much to Walter Block. Thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you in a couple months, I guess. Thank you, Walter.
Take care. Thanks for having me, guys.
Have a great night.
But
Bye.
Night.
Send me a URL for this.
oh yeah, I think we can send it right now.
Yep.
Oh well, hold on. Doesn't
All
matter.
right, well, thank you everybody so much for tuning into the stream. Hopefully we will have Walter back on stream soon. He is always a pleasure to have, such a distinct personality. His storytelling is great on stream. We love having him. And we want to personally thank all of you in chat for watching the stream. And that is it. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice night.